Now, Australia, we got yet another reminder, is, well, exactly what we think it to be. A normal joint that can tell the difference between something that is a genuine, organic show of support and something that is an imported load of nonsense. We saw today an interesting poll that showed us what Australians' attitudes were towards these protesters. 84% of people believe that the protests that took place last week put the entire community's health at risk. 84%. 61% of people, and this is to me more important, say that the situation in America is very different to Australia and has no relevance. Yet, because it's happening in other parts of the world, it must happen here too. It's our chance to be part of sort of globalisation by wokeness. We told you last night about the people who had been charged from attacking the Captain James Cook statue in Sydney. And I also spent some time talking about how the left, which 20 years ago was being giggled at as being the hairy armpit crowd from the arts department, who of course have now made their way into the bureaucracy and now have started to get themselves into elected office. Elected office such as your local councillor who can eventually become your mayor who can become your state MP, and so on and so on and so on. There is a James Cook Memorial in Melbourne. There is a socialist councillor in the city of Yarra. And guess what is about to happen? Yarra City Council is now going to ask the Indigenous community about what should happen to the Captain Cook statue. This is the same council that doesn't commemorate Australia Day on January 26. So what do you think's going to happen? Exactly as it is in the United States, where the trots on the street who people rolled their eyes at 20 years ago eventually end up becoming the councillor, becoming the mayor, becoming the governor. This sort of stuff is happening right now. And local council is where a lot of crazy exists right now in Australia. And there's a lot of people who now have worked out how to put pressure on the crazy that is local council. 12,000 people are trying to tell the city of Cairns that they have to pull down their version of a Captain Cook statue. But of course, nobody knows about how many of the 12,000 people who said this thing has to come down actually live there. As best as I understand, many of the people behind this campaign live nowhere near Cairns, let alone Queensland. Yet down it must come. As I said, we'll have a chat to the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, and then there's a pretty straight question I asked her today. If a statue in New South Wales is pulled down by a protester, will the New South Wales government replace it?
Obviously, we don't want it to come to that, Paul, but of course. But can I say we have very tough penalties for people breaking the law in that regard, imprisonment of up to 5 years. As I said in the last few days, it's very un-Australian to do that. If people feel passionately about something, gosh, you're a passionate person, but you express your views in a respectable way within the democracy, and that's what we ask everybody to do.
So good. In New South Wales, as they pull these things down, the state government will pay to put them back up. In Victoria, they will go back to the same group of people who said it was okay to move Australia Day, despite the fact that, of course, as we showed you last night, opinion polls show that 85% of Australians support Australia Day on January 26. All the way through, be it COVID-19 or be it politics, when you ask, about 15% of the country is kind of nuts. This 15% of the country believes, and remember, I showed you these polls during COVID, they believe, I'm not joking, that about 15% of 18 to 24-year-olds believe that coronavirus is being pushed around by 5G towers. About 15% of people like the Greens and are always in that position, well, trying to jump on the ante at all time, every time. These people, of course, are able to get enough people to find at least one person to get on a council. They're able to have tens of thousands of people, nay, probably hundreds of thousands of people, join them on Twitter in whichever campaign it is. Yet for some reason people think it's a completely different 100,000 people who are protesting on Invasion Day and a completely different 100,000 who are protesting about police injustice and a completely different 100,000 are protesting against the World Economic Forum and a completely different, you get the point. But of course, one rule for them, one rule for everyone else. And another example about how, well, council is the place where many of these cultural battles are being lost daily. This is a Mantra Hotel which is in suburban Melbourne. They want to expand this hotel. The council have said no, not because there'd be a parking issue or there'd be an issue with the neighbours. No, it's because of who some of the current residents are of that hotel. Councillors are concerned about the increasing the number of rooms of the hotel complex could open the way for more asylum seekers and refugees to be detained there, because there are some people who would have otherwise gone into detention who are currently being held in these hotel rooms. So there is no reason on a building code level for a local council to say that this hotel shouldn't expand itself. But because they don't like the politics of the detention of people who break immigration laws, the business doesn't get to build a bigger version of its hotel. This is a pattern that not enough people take notice of. What you used to roll your eyes at 20 years ago while you were relaxed and comfortable is now moving very close to being in charge. And it comes in lots of ways, and it comes in ways that are too late to fight it after a decision gets made. Andrew Bolt talked about this a bit earlier this evening, but I'll have a crack too. Now, of course, every day, the thing when it comes to how to prove your awesomeness, when it comes to woke, how to kiss the ring of lefties and the social progressives, is that you have to attack one thing that proves or suggests injustice as if it was a jihad. And as long as you do your one little thing to make the world a better place, as long as you attack your one brick in the wall, then the world gets a better place. Of course, don't do anything about the actual problems that exist, particularly, say, in regional Indigenous communities, or, God forbid, if we're allowed to talk about poor white people who exist on the fringes of our suburbs. No. Let's focus on beer. The Colonial Brewing Company is one in Western Australia. It's one from Margaret River. And it has now been torn from sale from at least one bottle shop chain. And they put out this statement: Blackheart and Sparrows. We appreciate that the people behind Colonial Brewing had no malicious intent in their choice of a brand name. But words have power. We have had discussions with Colonial in the past with concerns about their name. But their branding remains the same, and our decision was clear. Colonial is still a problematic word that speaks to a broader history of colonialism and colonisation that has caused irreversible harm to the First Nations people in Australia and Indigenous populations around the world. It's a beer. It's a beer. It's a beer, by the way, that the current owners of the company didn't choose the name for. A statement from the Colonial Brewing Company, who, of course, are folding. Because why wouldn't they, like a deck of cards? Because you wouldn't want to piss off Blackhearts and Sparrows as the people who sell this stuff. They say that the name Colonial was given to the brewery as one of the first to establish itself in the world regard of the wine region of the Margaret River. Colonisation, the wine region with one of the first craft breweries. Over the past 6 months, Colonial Brewing Company have undertaken a process to review and understand the options, blah, 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 blah. They'll fold, they'll change. Okay. Do we have another needless fight that we have to have? Oh, that's right, Lego. The past few days, there has been a, interesting conversation. Is Lego trying to tell people not to advertise selling products of police-themed Lego online? Answer, yes. They actually, now there was some misunderstanding about whether these things were being banned at all. Instead, no, Lego was telling certain businesses in the United States, hey, do us a favour, please don't publicise any of the following sets. The police set, the fiery set, the jail set, because of course all of this is going to trigger someone somewhere. So even when Lego came out and said, look, these things are still for sale, but we've made a decision not to advertise these things. Of course, it's ridiculous, but still. But that wasn't good enough for the keyboard warriors. Here's just one. Pull your police sets for real, then. It's Lego! Seriously? This is what we have to crack down. Because remember, this is how it works, right? Don't do anything about the real problems in society. Do ones about all of the symbolic things, as if these symbols have meaning that sends special messages through the air about what's acceptable and not acceptable. And apparently, any sort of positive depiction of a police officer is something to be frowned upon. Honestly, there isn't a person amongst us who hasn't for the past 3 weeks said the same thing every day about the police injustices that exist in the United States and the George Floyd killing that took place. No institution amongst us does not deserve to be deserves to be above the law. They don't deserve a lack of scrutiny. All of that has to happen. But the idea that the profession of people who you call when you're in trouble, that you call when your house is on fire, that help track down the person who assaulted a member of your family, that they have to be so demonised that you can't even play with toy versions of them. We've lost the plot. We're going mad at a rate of knots. And there will be plenty who will say, who cares, it's all just something on the fringes. But the problem is, as it was with the loony uni students of the 1990s, they become the mainstream of the bureaucracy by 2020. They get to elected office. They get to a position where no one can push back. So what seems a joke today is just a silver bullet being fired into that wall that must come down, the wall that, I don't know, for some reason is horrific. But it becomes insidious. You see, there have been plenty of times when police have worked with the Department of Education in the United States, when schools have had police officers come in and give lectures and tutorials and conversations about how policing works, for two reasons. One, not as a recruitment drive, but potentially to destigmatise or normalise what is the actual relationship with a police officer. The best way to make sure that things don't get out of control is to follow the directions given to you by a police officer. And sure, it might actually humanise the position that somebody might want to do with their life. Well, schools in the United States are now turning around and saying, that's it, no, we want nothing to do with the police. We are cutting ties by letting police officers into our schools. So God forbid your kid plays with a Lego police officer. God forbid your older kid gets to talk to one at school. And then we're surprised when people who get brought up in a world of this sort of batshit nonsense end up in the real world where they are working, perhaps at a place called Shake Shack in the United States, where we learnt today that not one but 3 police officers were poisoned by an employee who put bleach in their drinks. Seriously. The people who are there to protect us, when they get it wrong, deserve, of course, the full weight of the law. But the idea that you just get back on anyone in a blue uniform is ludicrous. The idea that police officers, simultaneously in our community, are worthy of mourning when 4 of them died by the side of the road in Victoria, their families changed forever, and then simultaneously they're a group of people that must be removed from our shops, removed from our schools, removed from our public consciousness. It's nuts. I support police on this program for one major reason. Every day when they go to work, they gamble with their life. Every day. In New South Wales, 7 of them are assaulted every single day. At the height of summer, at the depths of winter, on a Tuesday, a Friday, 7 officers a day. And they don't do it for the money. For a fraction of what your local woke AFL footballer will be paid, these people run into danger. They bet with their life every day. So we should react with deep scorn when we see examples of what will be imported into this country at some point in time. What we used to say was only in America is now what we read in the paper every day here. The kooks and the crazies of the 90s have been mainstreamed. They exist in the power structure of 2020. And of course, to do so and to say so means my punishment needs to be that I need to be ripped off the air. Because of course, dissent is not allowed in Crazy Town. And of course, when it comes to the United States, you will hear very little about a story about 3 police officers being poisoned by a member of the public because they are police officers. Instead, you see garbage like this. NBC News, one of the big free-to-air newses in the United States, very worried that Donald Trump is about to have a campaign rally in the next couple of weeks.
Comes as President Trump is eyeing a return to his favorite stage, those massive campaign rallies. Now set to relaunch at an indoor arena in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Saturday night.
We expect to have, it's like a record-setting crowd. We've never had an empty seat, and we certainly won't in Oklahoma.
Now watch this. Exactly at the end of that story, the newsreader is talking to the reporter from the White House, and then watch the next story where apparently coronavirus doesn't exist when random strangers hang out together.
The type of gathering the CDC classifies as highest risk of spreading coronavirus. And just as Tulsa's public health director says, it's too soon for this size of a crowd.
My preference would be that it be postponed until it's safe to actually have an event where people can come together and be a part of the political process.
Coronavirus cases and deaths are low in Oklahoma, but the numbers are now rising. The president's campaign manager tonight announcing that all attendees will get a temperature check, hand sanitizer, and a mask. But it's not clear whether they'll be required to wear it.
Peter Alexander at the White House tonight. Thank you. In Seattle this evening, protesters continue occupying part of the city and demanding police reform.
So Donald Trump's going to have people inside an arena. That means there's going to be a COVID bomb that goes off. Thousands of people take over 6 city blocks in the United States. It's just normal. But does this surprise you at all? The same news organisation, 2 examples about the double standards when it comes to tweets. Black Lives Matter protests outside the Brooklyn Museum in New York in the United States, NBC News. Packed crowd. Then when it comes to Donald Trump, President Trump plans to host a rally. Despite the fact that most of the country shuttered from coronavirus, health experts are questioning that decision. So when it's Trump, terrible. When it's everyone else, yay. And also worth noting too is about the bureaucracy that gets to decide what is decent and not about what goes on television and what goes on radio. Now, a few months ago, the broadcaster Ray Hadley received a threat that was made towards his grandkid. He went on air and understandably blasted back at somebody who made a threat to the grandkid. Now, I don't know what the threat was. I don't know how the threat was delivered. If Ray wants to talk about that on the radio show, good luck. But I only learned about this via what was reported today because by standing up for his grandkid, who was being threatened by some piece of work, guess what happened? The media authority in Australia today sided with the person who made the threat, suggesting that he had breached decency standards back in May 2019. Remember, he's defending his grandkid against a threat. The Australian Communications and Media Authority said the language used by Hadley during his radio program in May of 2019, including terms such as flea, low-life dog, also implied that if members of his family had located the individual, then they would be drinking through a straw for a long time. Remember, he's blowing up because someone somewhere sends a threat about his grandkid. Yet some cardigan wearer who listens to Auntie Fran in the morning and approves every complaint that gets made against commercial radio, well, this is what they had to say today about a man who was firing up about a threat that was made to his grandkid. The ACMA recognises that Mr Hadley was being defensive of his granddaughter. However, it is not appropriate for him to use this position as a public broadcaster to direct threatening comments towards an individual who made threats about his granddaughter.